And that is something that I want for my legacy, is that she never gave up. She's a survivor. She is definitely a warrior for sure. I have gone through so many traumatic things, and it changed me. Every moment of it, I had to be somebody stronger, somebody more independent, somebody that was going to survive and keep on surviving. For a second, I was looking at my life. I was just really amazed to know that I had gotten sober, gotten custody of my daughter, gotten out of a domestic violence situation, and I helped change the life of my spouse. Not only that, but to finally be in a stable home to where none of us have to feel like, where are we going to go now? I felt at that moment that I have broken that generation cycle. I'm just proud of myself. I've never been proud of myself. I never told myself that. I can say that today.
Today on Project Basecamp, we have a very special guest here, Salencia Thompson. She has been through many struggles through her life. She's not only telling her story of recovery, but she's also sharing part of her culture with all of us. So I wanted to say thank you, Salencia. Could you introduce yourself to us?
Yes. Yate Shed Salencia Thompson and Share. Trohe Galini and Share. Ashihe Bashichin. That is my saltwater clan, and the second one is the flowing water as well. So I'm from that family.
I do want to say that both of us come from different nations and tribes, Salencia being Diné and myself being from Santa Clara Pueblo. But we come here today with much respect for our ancestors and our cultural beliefs. And a huge part of our cultures is that we are storytellers and healers in our ways. I just want to pay respect to that today. And thank you again for sharing your journey with us, because this is really important as a Native woman to be sharing. I also would like to say that I'm not fluent in my language in Tewa, but I would like to say a few words as well. Umbiakindi ne tapoat takibogi hapowi. Meran nentu wovi ha get nami. Umbi he hapo. Nambi sarouri mani gi. Kapowi. Nambi he hapo gi. Kunda wawa. Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about who you are and what your identity is. You said that was a really hard thing to answer, but the more that we talk about it, I feel like you know truly who you are. So could you tell our audience not just who you are as a mother or a wife or the person in recovery, but who are you?
I would like to say that I am a survivor. I'm definitely a strong, independent woman.
I know you shared that you grew up, Diné, and in the Apple Valley Navajo Nation in Arizona. If you could close your eyes and think about where you grew up and your home, what would you see and what would you describe to us?
So Red Valley, Arizona is about an hour out of Shiprock, New Mexico. And there's only one road in and one way out. So when you enter Red Valley, it's surrounded by mountains. Where I grew up is, they call it the Beautiful Mountain. And next to it is the Bear Mountain. So when you look at it, they look like 3 bears. It was very green, and the reason they call it Red Valley is because, the dirt's red, the rocks are red. So it's a very beautiful place.
What was it like to grow up on the reservation?
It was really hard because we didn't have running water at that time when I was very young. And They didn't have paved roads at that time either. So coming into town was like driving on dirt road. And also they had one trading post, one like chapter house. So it started out really small, and also we didn't have electricity, and so it was pretty hard. We lived in a really small house, and my grandmother, she had other grandchildren living with us too, so it was pretty full. And my grandfather was the only provider in the family, and he would travel out to Colorado. He would stay out there for a week and then come back on the weekend. So my grandmother was the one who was like head of the household, and raising all of us grandkids was pretty tough on her. She had a big livestock, a lot of like horses, sheeps, and chickens, things like that. So that did keep me pretty busy helping her with all of that, because we would have to go down by the creek and there was a water pump. So you'd have to pump the water from there for the animals and also for like taking a bath, things like that. And during the winter time, we had to drive up into the mountains to like get firewood. So we'd be doing about maybe 2 to 3 loads of wood and coming, back and forth. And that's pretty much, how we survived out there. And it was not until around probably 2000s or so, they started putting the electric posts near the homes, and they started to add on additions to my grandmother's house. So they started having the running water and things like that. So,
do you ever talk to your kids and tell them what life was like then, and what do they say now?
Yes, because now everything's just, technology, and everything's so close to home, and we don't have livestock. I did tell my kids, that we didn't have TV either. One of the family member had one, so every now and then everybody would kind of like gather over there and watch a movie or something. But the majority of the time, we were either working around the house, or I didn't have much of a childhood, like getting to play outside or things like that. Probably once in a great while, I would be doing that. But I would have to kind of sneak away and like with my other cousins, and we'd be out building a tree house somewhere. And, I tell my children that even though it was hard, it felt more simple just because there wasn't really anything that we had to worry about. Because growing up without like electricity and water, it did teach you, how to survive and how to do certain things without, technology. So I said even at night, it was so pitch black when the sun went down. We didn't have any street lights or anything like that. So I said, it was kind of scary, and we would use these gas lamps. And so once the light went out, you had to be in bed. But it was a really hard experience, and I wouldn't want my children to, feel those things. So,
Native communities historically have suffered through much traumas, and it's apparent generation to generation. Do you see that was something happening in your family, or you've seen it through the generations?
At the time, I didn't understand it. The reason I say that is because seeing, domestic violence, seeing the alcohol, seeing all of these like horrible things, especially like sexual abuse, things like that. I didn't catch on to that until I was probably like a teenager. But my grandmother, she would tell me, her mom was pretty hard on her too, growing up, and she got introduced to alcohol at a young age as well. And so she just wanted, us to kind of learn how to be tough, how to kind of keep your emotions to yourself. And because whatever she saw any of us crying or complaining about something, she'd immediately get upset about it and kind of tell us, like, why are you crying? You don't need to be, just keep, going, keep moving forward. So it was really hard to kind of learn now that that's been passed on from generation to generation.
And you said about violence and abuse. The story you shared with me is that at 4 years old, you were witness to that in your own life, and you saw your mother's death in front of you. Looking back, how has that changed the course or trajectory of your life?
I remember that day. I was 4 years old, and I remember when my mother passed away. I was with my stepfather and two of my siblings, and we were at my grandmother's house, and my stepfather was throwing the baseball with one of my siblings, and he ended up hitting them with the baseball in the face. So that's what upset my mom. And I just remembered her jumping like on the driver's side door, and she was trying to get her purse. She was trying to reach over him, and I just remember them arguing, and he drove off with her hanging from the side of the driver door, and I just remembered her rolling like under the he had a really big truck, and so that's what caused her to die. We all ran down there, and there was just three of us. And I remembered her telling me, or us, that, to be there for each other. And I just could see her like kind of drifting off. And I know she was crying, and we didn't know what to do. There was nobody around. There was nobody home. So we had to sit there with her until somebody came along. And that was not until in the evening time. And because, we didn't have cell phones, or we didn't have any way to contact anyone. So we waited with her. I don't remember going to like her funeral. From there, it's been a really big like fog to me after that. And right around when I was about 9, that was the first time I was sexually abused from a family member. And that really changed a lot for me, because like here I am growing up without a mother and a father, and I didn't have anyone to protect me. I just felt really ashamed, and I kept that to myself until I was old enough to build up the courage, to tell someone. But they didn't believe me. And so the abuse kept going on, and it was really hard because I had to keep going back, to the home where this was happening. But, waking up every day, I had to keep moving forward. And even with not knowing at that age what that purpose was, but, I got through, those times. So.
And you said it felt like nobody was listening. Mm-hmm. But were you able to have a voice, or was it something you could tell anybody?
No, because my grandmother was the one, I confronted this to. And she didn't want to, believe what was going on. And I tried to tell another family member, but it was just like nobody was believing me. So I just, just kept that to myself, and I shut down. And after that, I kind of felt a little different from my family because I was being treated differently. I was the one who, was doing everything for my grandmother, and I kind of felt more of like a slave, having to, cook, having to take care of the livestock, and cleaning and things like that. I had to grow up at a young age, and it was just, it was pretty horrible.
And at 10 years old, taking your first drink of alcohol, I can see what you're explaining, that was your reason to numb the pain that you were going through. Can you walk us through how alcohol became something you were reliant on, even at such a young age, and the progression of alcohol use?
A family member at the time was drinking and asked me if I wanted some. And it wasn't beer, it was like kind of like the hard liquor stuff. So when I first tried it, I was drawn to it because it was getting me intoxicated faster. And so for me to understand that, the more hard liquor, it was just like I would just use it to get to the point of like not feeling anything, to not remember, at the time, like what's going on. And so it started to get worse from there because of the heavy, liquor that I was drinking. And so to just kind of get myself away from what was going on, that was the only thing that I would like look to doing. And back then, you could easily ask somebody, like, can you get this for me? And they were like, yeah, okay, And so it was that simple to just kind of get it. So.
And that was around 10.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us just about how it progressed from there? Like in high school, maybe, or even after that?
It was getting bad because my mother's sisters, I could just see them kind of interacting with their kids in front of me, like doing it on purpose, hugging them and loving them and just laughing with them. And it was just always that teasing too, where my other cousins would tell me like, oh, you don't have a mom, you don't have a dad. And my other siblings, I didn't grow up with them either. It was like maybe once in a while I would see them. So there was nobody there to defend me or to stand up for me, or to even, not even an adult, like would even say, hey, like don't talk to her like that, don't treat her like that. And my grandmother wasn't a very affectionate person. And so it was very rare that she would hug me or she would tell me that she loved me. And so that just kind of put the wall up for me. And drinking was, I wasn't like a social drinker. So like in high school, I wasn't like going to parties or anything like that. It was just whenever a family member was going through domestic violence and they needed to get away. And so when I was with them, that was what was getting our minds off of what just happened, what we just seen, what we just witnessed. And that's when it did get worse. And also, not only from my mom's side of the family, but also from my siblings' family. Like I also witnessed a lot of things from them as well when I would go and visit them. Like there were times when we had to hide or like run away from other family members drinking, and they would get pretty violent because if you called the law enforcement on the reservation, it would take about 2 hours or even more, or sometimes they don't even show up. So even if something like that was going on, the only thing that we could do was prepare ourselves and to just run away. And that was what I really grew up on, is running away from all these, traumatic things that were going on.
You said alcohol was helping control your feelings of pain. But when did alcohol start to control you and control your life?
In my junior year, I met this guy, and I wanted to move away from my grandmother's place. I wanted to leave because it was just getting worse. And so this family welcomed me into their home. And every now and then I was drinking when I, in their home too. So it started to become an issue, but it would more of these like times when I would feel like I was about to get abandoned, and it was like, okay, well, I don't care because, I'm just going to go and drink. And even though that was the issue of being where I was staying, it was just kind of bringing the comfort there because I couldn't adjust to like having someone else trying to care for me or trying to tell me, what to do. And so they always gave me that option. Like, well, if you're just going to choose to drink, I don't want you to be here. And so that's where the alcohol was just like, I was choosing that more than thinking about having a safe place to stay. Mm-hmm. And so when that happened, that's when I was like getting kicked out, and didn't have anywhere to go. And then I would come back and say like, oh, I'm not going to do it again. I'm sorry. So, but it's sad to know that it did take control of me.
I know you said there was a point when you had even gotten in trouble with the law and DWIs. You said that at the second DWI, you had lost custody of your children. But I think not a lot of people really understand what happens when somebody is arrested for DWI, or even from the perspective of a Native woman. Like, what is really happening? Could you just tell us more about that experience or what you remember from that?
Yeah, this was right around Christmas. I was living in Utah with a family member, and around this time I had broken up with my children's father, and because I had found out that he was starting a family with this woman. And so I have been in that relationship for over 12 years. I met him when I was 14. And so it was like an on and off thing. And when Christmas came, I drove down to Shiprock, and I was kind of hoping that we would rekindle and try to work on the relationship. But he told me that he didn't want to, and that he started to threaten me about getting custody of the kids. And so at that point, I was very upset, and I left. And I started to drink right around Cortez, Colorado. And so from driving from Shiprock to Utah is about 8.5 hours. And so starting from there, and where I have gotten pulled over was in Willington, Utah. It's about an hour and a half, I think, past Moab. And so I was getting close into Price, and it was snowing. It was snowing pretty bad, and I just had, just kept drinking and drinking, and I'm already like 3.5 hours, the drive from Cortez, from where I started, and I didn't realize it was snowing, and I just remembered like the passenger tire blowing out, and that's what pulled me off from the side of the road. So this retired cop, he pulled up behind me, and he asked me if I was okay, and he could smell, the alcohol. And so he called law enforcement, and they came, and the officer was asking me like who was going to take my children, and asking me where I was headed. I told him that I was going back to Provo, Utah, and he said if there's not anyone to come pick up your children, they're going to go with CYFD. So they ended up coming as well. And at that time, I didn't know who, to call. I wasn't in the right state of mind. My alcohol level was probably twice over the limit. And I just remember them trying to call or contact the father. And he told them that he wasn't able to drive up there to get them. And so the caseworker told him that, well, your children are going to go into foster care if you don't have anyone to come get them. So that's what happened. My daughter at the time, she was 3, and my youngest was about 9 months. And I just remembered my 3-year-old like crying. She was screaming. She was trying to yell for me. And I tried to ask the officer if I could calm her down, but he was like, no, you can't see your children. And I just, heard them from a distance crying. And at that point, it was very heartbreaking. I spent probably about a week in jail in Price. So when I got out, I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know how to get back to New Mexico. At that point, I didn't know what I was going to do or where I was going to go. And so just finding out that my children were with a foster family, it was really hard because I didn't know if they were like safe or who was taking care of them. So experiencing sexual abuse, that was one of my biggest fears. Like, I don't know who these families are. I don't know who, so that was constantly on my mind. But I really went through a lot of struggles with the court system in Utah up until the point where I was failing the court orders. I had to take like tests and try to get counseling, things like that was required for me to get my children back. And I didn't have any family. I was completely alone doing this. And so the alcohol was like the comfort for me. Mm-hmm. And I was just, wanting to give up. And I tried to live in New Mexico. I tried in Phoenix, Arizona. I tried out back in Utah. And finally, like, when I got a place of my own, the court system was already telling me that they were going to adopt them to another family. And so that was really hard for me to hear. At this point, I was feeling like I was failing them. And I don't know why I was even, like, this wasn't motivating me. It wasn't even telling me to, like, hey, put it down. Like, come on, you got to take this seriously. Your children need you. I don't know why it wasn't clicking. And so when the Navajo Nation got involved, they explained to the court that these children can't be living outside of their culture with another family. So they had to either bring them back down to get adopted to like a native family or a family member. So the father and the stepmother was the one who made that happen. And that's how my children came back down to New Mexico.
And you said it was something that just wasn't clicking. I think a lot of people struggle with that. You know, whether it be the first time or the third time that they've been introduced to tools for recovery, whether it be medication-assisted treatment, whether it be therapy or counseling, groups, NA, AA meetings. All of that can be really foreign to people, especially if it's their first time. And I think that for like your history explaining to us, you're used to just being in silence and probably having fear of surrendering to this process and telling people these stories and opening up about these things and reliving the traumas of talking about these things when you've never been heard and nobody would listen to you before. Why would you tell somebody now? And I think a lot of people are discouraged. You know, it probably is like, oh my gosh, but why couldn't you just change right there and then? But it's not that easy, and it takes time to change.
I think that I noticed that when people tell that story, they always also mention that they have had, family to try to help them. They have had other relatives like try to take their children to take care of them. And for some reason, like they knew somebody was there to take care of their children. It was okay for them to continue on doing what they're doing. But for me, I was crying out for help, trying to ask, my family, like, why can't you do this for me? Why can't you take in my children? Like, why am I the one that has to go through this alone? And so that's the reason that it was a little harder for me, because nobody was there to tell me like, hey, everything's going to be okay, or let's do this. Yes, we're going to get your children back. I'm here for you. So less motivation and less support is the reason that I was stuck in that cycle.
Was there anybody that you felt support from?
From an older sibling, but at the time they had their own family too. So they were going through like their own thing. And it's kind of strange, our relationship, like growing up without them. So we were like really different. And so we didn't know how to help each other or just what to say to one another. And even though we have the same mother but different fathers, it was a little different for us to kind of be there for one another. And so it was just more of like, oh, well, you can maybe be here for a couple days, but, you're going to have to find somewhere else to stay. Or, I don't know, to tell you, like, it has to be up to you. It didn't feel like support. It was just like, well, you're an adult. You should know that by now kind of deal, So I didn't have anybody really. Just every now and then I had an older sibling that would just call and like, hey, what's going, like, how are you doing? But that was about it. But I did have non-family members. There was a Native lady that she's from Shiprock, and she drove like around this time I was like still getting in trouble with the law, and she would drive out to where I was at to pick me up. It was kind of strange to meet someone like that because she wanted to try to help me, but also her situation just wasn't in the right place as well.
So at this point, sounds like your children are with their father and stepmother. They're very young at this age when they're taken out of your custody. But I know something very difficult happened during that time. Can you tell us about your daughter Asia and tell us who she was?
I wish I knew what she was like. I was ordered to have open visitation, so I could let the father know and the stepmother, like, hey, I want to see the kids, or can I talk to the kids? I was sending out emails or text messages trying to get a hold of them, but I didn't get any responses back. So she grew up without me. I missed out on her first steps, her first birthday, whatever it is that she was going through. I missed out on that. I never understood why they kept the kids from me. And so the only thing that I remember from Asia is that I got a call from the Denver hospital, and they told me to go out there immediately. So I drove from Utah to Colorado, and when I got there, I walked in and she was laying there, and she was hooked up to the ventilator, and I could just see like all of these bruising all over her body, and I noticed these burns on her hands. So at that point, I was trying to figure out what was going on. I even asked the father, how come you didn't call me way before this was happening? And he just told me that, well, I didn't know what to do. It just kind of happened all of a sudden, and I was busy, trying to get her to the hospital. The doctor sat down with us and basically told us that she had a severe brain trauma and that she wasn't going to be able to make it. And so it was really hard for me to hear. And surprisingly, my grandmother, my grandfather, and two of my aunts came. But it wasn't like they were concerned about what was going on. They didn't hug me. They weren't crying. They weren't like showing that concerned. And they just kind of sat there and looked at me and like, what's going on? How come we had to drive all the way out here? And so I told them to leave. I said, you know what? I don't need this from you. You have never supported her. I don't know why you're here now. And my ex-mother-in-law, she was the one who was really involved in all of my children's lives. She helped too during the custody situation. They were living with her for some time until the dad got to settle down and, find a place of his own. And so she was there, and she tried to tell me, let's just take her home. I know that she'll be on the ventilator, but she'll be with us. I told her I can't have my daughter, live like that. It's not what I want for her. So she bought this unicorn pajama for her. And the day that they told us that they were going to unplug the ventilator, she put it on her, and we gave her a sponge bath, just kind of washed her down. We fixed her hair, and the nurse asked me if I wanted to stay in the room to hear her last heartbeat. And I told her that I wanted to hold her one last time. So they took her off the ventilator, and I held her. And when she was a baby, I always sang Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to her. So as I was holding her, I was singing that, and I could just hear the machine slowly, going down. And I just remembered her looking at me, and she took her last breath. And I just kept, singing to her. And after a while, that we were waiting for the coroner to show up, and the nurse came in, and she said they were here to take Asia. So at that point, I didn't want them to take her. I started to kind kind of fight, you know. I said I wasn't ready to let her go. I can't do this. And the doctors, you know, everybody was like, you need to calm down or they're going to arrest you, you know. So as they were pulling her away, I really felt like a part of me was going with her. I was so upset at this point with the father, you know. Like, how could this have happened? Like, what were you doing? What were you thinking? How come you didn't protect her? And so after we had her funeral, it was really shocking because I did tell the father, I said, I don't want my family to be there. I don't want them to, you know, pretend like they really care about what's going on. And somehow the word like got around and they were like, oh, she's going to have security there. And I was like, oh my gosh. So just my siblings and their children were there and some of his family. And so after that happened, they had an open investigation for a while. And I really don't remember any of that. That part is very blurry to me. But the drinking definitely got heavy.
After losing Asia, this was the darkest time. And you said that you tried to end your own life. What was happening in those moments?
This was on my birthday. I was with one of my siblings and we were drinking heavily. We were at an apartment complex and I just remembered like I knew what I wanted to do. And so I was wearing a hoodie and the string was pretty thick. I took it off and everybody else was pretty intoxicated. So I was like, okay, this is the time to kind of get away from them. I don't remember where I went, but it was near like a fence. And I decided to try to hang myself at that point. I don't remember going to the hospital. I don't know how long I was there. But my older sibling was with me, and the doctor was telling her that I wasn't going to possibly make it. So she had to make that decision for me. And I remembered I could barely like open my eyes and I was trying to say something. And my older sister, you know, she was pretty happy that I was awake, but she didn't know what I was trying to say. So I was trying to write something down. And finally she figured out whose name I wrote down. And it was my husband's. And we weren't married at the time, but I like rekindled with him. And so she reached out to him and he was telling me that, because I don't remember that, but he explained to me that he was on video chat and he saw me there on the ventilator, and my older sister was explaining to him that I might not possibly make it. So he was singing this song in Navajo, and I guess the doctor told him that he saw a tear come down my eyes. And I got up from there. I was in the mental health side of the hospital for suicide watch for about like 4 days or so. And I got out from there, and a year after that, about 2019, I tried it again. I tried to commit suicide. I ended up getting very intoxicated, and I slipped my wrist on both sides. And I don't even remember what happened. I don't know where I was. I don't even know how that happened. But my husband was telling me that he saw me like the next day, and he was trying to ask me like what was going on. And I ended up going back to the hospital to get stitches, and the doctor was telling me that I guess I ran away from the hospital. They were trying to provide services for me to help me, but I ended up just like running off. And so he was like, I wasn't even sure if you were gonna make it because those cuts were pretty deep. And so they ended up putting me back in the suicide watch again for 72 hours. And the counselor there was asking me questions, and he asked me if I had any other children. At that time, it was just my oldest one. And he asked me, do you want to live for her? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you told me that you had lost your mother and you grew up without her, and you were always wondering, why she left. And when he asked me that, I started to think about that. Like, he's right. I don't want my daughter to grow up without a mother. So that was the last time that I even tried to commit suicide, because that always stuck with me.
And it sounds like in that moment was when you decided you wanted to live.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me the chills listening to that, because you've gone through so much, and to lose your daughter, and then to think about not being here, not existing in this earth, and not realizing how much you've struggled without your mother in your life. Sometimes we just can't think about the bigger picture. But it goes back to what you're saying, is that sometimes we need the support, and that person at that time said something that really impacted your thinking, and inevitably it was probably something that really changed the course of your future. You said that you've been working to uncover the truth of what happened to Asia, and I want to know what keeps you going and what you hope will happen from here.
So around 2022 is when I decided to get sober. And from that day on, I told myself, I need to know the truth. I feel like any mother would want to know. And so my oldest daughter, she was still living with her father, and he wasn't, allowing me to see her or anything like that. So I decided to go back to court and reopen our custody case. And that took a while, but I found an attorney to help me with that. And so I started to collect her medical records from Denver. That was the first one that I've received. And it was pretty difficult to get, because at the time they were telling me, how are you related to her? I said, I'm the biological mother. And they're like, well, do you have proof? And I said, yes. I'm not understanding like why you guys are giving me a hard time. And the father had full custody at that time, so he told them not to release anything to me. Now that we were going back to court, I received that, and also her autopsy. And I also reached out to a private investigator. And everything just wasn't making sense. And that's when I started to get curious about, what really happened. So once the father found out that I was trying to get custody of my daughter, that's where it was getting really challenging, because he tried to bring up a lot of things that I was doing in the past to try to keep her from me. But slowly, I was going back into counseling for substance abuse. And I didn't just have one counselor, I was like having two, just to get the extra help that I needed. As much as the father and his new wife were trying so hard, I mean, these people were like telling lies, sending the cops to my apartment, trying to come up with anything that they could. The court told the father, can you show me, what can you prove to me that you're capable of taking care of her? And at that time, he wasn't stable either, and he was still, drinking as well. That's what helped me get sole custody of her. So before that happened, I had a visitation with her, and she was very distant from me. She didn't like what was going on, so I just sat down with her and I talked to her, and that's when she opened up to me and told me that my daughter didn't fall outside of the tub, because that was what was said at the time, that she had fallen out from the tub and hit like the corner of the sink, and that's what caused her death. So I took her to an investigator in Durango. They had a conversation and they decided to reopen her case. And so at this point, the stepmother at the time was no longer with the father. She showed up at my door, and that's when like the finger pointing was happening. And so I was like, okay, I would, record these conversations, everything that was happening. I was documenting everything. And I was like, okay, these things are not making sense. Her story's not adding up. His story's not adding up. So it got really close to the point of when the detective told me that they were going to get a third person to look at her autopsy, because the other two, they had, different opinions, and they just didn't know what was really going on. But the obvious, picture of it was that it was child abuse. And so the detective was telling me that, well, we interviewed, the stepmother, and she's kind of saying the same thing. So I also got involved with the MMDR, which is the Missing and Murdered Diné relatives. I got in contact with one of the advocates, and she told me a story about her son getting murdered, and she wanted to find answers, and so she did a lot, to do that. So she was my main resource that I was going to, and I was getting a lot of help from her, just how to talk about the things that, she was going through, my daughter. And we were walking, in the parades. We were going to these events to spread the awareness. That just made me a lot stronger. And yes, it was difficult to have, all these people against you trying to tell you, like, why do you need to know? Like, why can't you just move on? Why can't you just leave it alone? To me, not knowing that I wasn't there for her, I know I can do this for her now. And I'm not going to, stop. I already know what's going on. And so I just need an attorney or someone to finally say, hey, she is telling the truth. Yes, there is something that we need to look at. Yes, we do need to, revisit all of these things. That's what, kept me going, because I need justice for her.
I hope that your voice will travel and this conversation goes somewhere. I pray that your daughter and your family will get the answers that you deserve. I think there's many, many families, like you said, through the murdered, missing, and Indigenous women through the United States that are wanting answers. They want more help. They want more law enforcement on their side. And the more voices that we have talking about this and coming together, the more we can have support for Native American people to get the help that they need, just like any other person would, And it's not to say that because your daughter is Native and you're Native that you haven't gotten answers. But, you know, there it's high correlation there that that's likely why. You said that although in the story you're sober at this point, but going back a little bit, you said you and your husband both were struggling. And there came a moment in your relationship where you just said, this is enough. Can you tell me about that day?
Yes. So, I've known him like in high school, but we lost contact after high school when I moved away, and I didn't hear from him or try to reach out to him. And so after my daughter passed away, I decided to try to reach out to him, and I did. And at that time, he also had lost his children's mother. So I think that's where we connected, like the bonding part of it. I didn't know at the time that he was struggling with drugs and alcohol. It was up until I started to live with him. And that was like right around, because with my children's father, I went through domestic violence with him too. So I was looking for that love and finding someone who was going to, comfort me, because not having that growing up, that's what I was searching for. So I thought I found it in him because he was like saying all the right things from the beginning. When we were drinking, he would get really violent. And that's the first time that I experienced him putting his hand on me. And I have tried to ask for help. There were other families that were there, and nobody did. Nobody came to my rescue. So I didn't have anywhere to go, at that time. I was living out of my car, and sometimes my children would visit. My third oldest, she lives with her father in Utah. So every now and then, he would allow her to come visit with me. And when those times happened, he would put me and her in danger, like kicking us out during the winter time. And it was just on and off thing that I was going through with him, the domestic violence. And the amount of time that he was telling me that he loves me and I'm sorry, I'm not going to do this again, I was just like believing that. And for some reason, like tolerating this abuse. And I felt, he was taking advantage of that because he knew nobody was going to come to my rescue. Like I didn't have family to be there for me. And so the manipulation was like, it was there. Like, well, who's going to do this for you? Or who's going to, come to your rescue kind of deal. It was very toxic. And so when we were, trying to get to know each other, it wasn't in a healthy way. It was just based off the alcohol is how we were connected. So I have 5 children, but one passed away, so I only have 4 now. And my second to the last, I was pregnant with her, and it wasn't a planned pregnancy. I was very scared at the time. I was just like, I can't do this. And I actually tried to end the pregnancy. And so when she was born, she was about 2 weeks old when her dad drove off with her. Like he beat me up first, and then he took her from me. And it was very, I don't even know how to explain that, because I was trying to, call him, trying to get the cops to come out to where we were living on the reservation. And like nothing was being done about it. I was just so scared of where she was at, how she was doing, and what was going to happen. And so after that, it was then again, the promises, like, I'm not going to do this again. I'm sorry. And a year after that, I got pregnant, and after this, it was still happening. We moved out into town, and I was like, okay, you know, we have our own place here. We're going to try to make it work out here. And when my son was born, it happened again. And this time I went unconscious. And so at that point, it was to the point of like where he could have spent time like in prison, because it wasn't, you know, the first time that it was happening. And so at this point, I told him, if you don't love your family, you know, I can't continue on to do this. Just to see written on that paper was my son's name. And just reading, you know, what had happened, it was a really big eye-opener for me. And I just like put myself in that position of like, why am I doing this to my children? Why am I continuing on with this relationship? And so I sat down with him and I just gave it to him straight. I said, you either get help and you stop what you're doing, or we can't do this anymore. So you have a choice to make. And so we both decided, you know, that we were going to stop drinking. And he got the help he needed. He also came from a broken home. He didn't know his father. I was like helping him grow. And even though I wasn't doing it for myself, but at the time, it was like, because I have a big heart and I'd rather be helping other people than myself. So I was focusing on him getting better. And he did. Eventually, he started to become a father that he never thought he would be. And he continued on his education. And so we've been both sober for 4.5 years now. And that was the moment that, you know, I could really see that if someone truly loved you, he would make that sacrifice to make things better. So that's what happened.
What would you say forgiveness looks like in your marriage?
Even though I was getting counseling still and for him, and they always told me that, like, you need to forgive him for what he's done to you. And even the infidelity, I was just trying to think about that, like, oh my gosh, you know, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to forgive him? Like, but then there was a time when I remembered I was probably, during my freshman year, the person who sexually assaulted me, I confronted him. And I told him that I forgive you and that I'm a strong person now, and you didn't hurt that person. You didn't bring me down. You know, I was like telling him face to face, and that's what I needed to do also with my husband. Mm-hmm. And so when we got married, we sat down with a pastor, and he was telling us that, you know, you two need to tell each other all of the things that you have done. All you need to confess your sins to each other. And so we were just like sitting there like, oh my gosh, like where are we gonna start? So when that happened, you know, the pastor was like, okay, once you guys admit these things, you guys have to start moving forward. And that's what we did. You know, we sat down. It was so hard. It was the hardest thing we probably had to do. Also, when I felt like things weren't changing, I told him, you have to understand that I have gone through so many traumatic things, and it changed me every time something was happening. Every moment of it, I had to be somebody stronger, somebody more independent, somebody that was going to survive and keep on surviving. And so when that happened, you know, I'm not going to be the same person I was when you met me. Now that I'm a mother and I'm also a stepmother to your children, that also changed me. You know, I had to let him know that these changes were for a good thing, But to just learn the new person I was, that's what I, need him to understand. And I said, I've done it for you. When you were struggling, I didn't know who you were, but I was being patient with you. And I had to learn every time the person you were becoming, the person you were changing into. And I said, that took a lot for me to do. And nobody was telling me how to do that. And so I didn't know anything about marriage or how to be a stepmother, but from the survival instinct, just knowing that when I was younger, having to kind of run away and, figure out what the next step was going to be, that's what my life was like. And so I'm more like the disciplined person. And so for him to come from a different family of support and loving, and he was adjusting to somebody who was saying, no, like, I'm not going to give out a hand to you. Like, you have to do it on your own. You have to do these things by yourself. I can teach you, but you're the one who's going to have to do it on your own. So that was a big adjustment for him. And that was also the thing that he had to learn too. So when I explained that to him, he started to realize that you're right. You are a different person. And that's the person that I want to, learn to know. So that's what we did. And that's how I began to forgive him for a lot of things that we had gone through.
And as you painted the picture of your youth and early adulthood to us, you've overcome so many things, so many painful obstacles. But at this point in your life, it sounds like you were finding your strength, and you knew that you would continue to be strong with or without anybody in your life, because most of your life you had to learn to support yourself. And I think that is a huge realization for people when they start to have confidence in themselves, confidence in who they are as a person. And going back to that first question, like, who are you and what's your identity? So yeah, that's just a miracle. And you said faith was a huge part of this, and you guys sitting and talking with the pastor and talking about forgiveness. Do you feel that you found God, or did God find you?
I found him. I spent a lot of time growing up so angry at him. And I would cry, like, why did you take my mom away? Why did you take my dad away? Why did I have to go through this abuse, from these men? Like, why was I left alone? Like, how come I didn't have any family? How come I can't find that love, that support? That's one of the things that really kind of pushed me away from God. And being angry for that long and actually coming to the point of surrendering my life to him, because I got baptized when I got sober. So at that time, my husband, he didn't really believe in God as well. But there was a time when I told him, just pray. Like right now, just pray. Don't think about it. Just say what you have to say. And he did. And he was like, that's the first time anybody ever asked me to do that. And so I thought about that, like, all this time, no matter what situation I was putting myself in harm's way, I didn't care if I got hurt. I didn't care, and so I felt too that somebody was definitely looking out for me. So when the pastor started talking with us and kind of getting us into the Word of God, that is when I felt a big change. And that's just where I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start praying not only for myself, but with my spouse, with my children. And so it's really, it's amazing to see my youngest one, my son, when we sit down to eat, he knows, like, we're going to pray. And so when he hears either one of us praying, you can hear him talking too, like kind of trying to repeat the things that we're talking about or praying for. And that's what I want, for my children, to make them understand that God is always with you and you're not alone. And it was really amazing for me to finally see that no matter what I was going through, God was there, and that he had a plan for me, and that he had made me one of his strongest warriors, and that's like a really big gift that I could have gotten, because I always question myself, like, my gosh, how did I do it? How did I get through this? And I knew that God was the one who was there always with me.
You said you've gotten strength from your faith. You said that you have a big heart as well. And now finding purpose in your life with those things in mind. You are now a certified peer support worker. Looking back on how far you've come, did you ever think that that would be your path?
No. When I gone to college for a medical assistant, I was always picturing myself in the hospital. That was something I wanted to do. But I never pursued it because all of these things were happening. So at that time, I wasn't able to go back to school. And, I was like, okay, this is not going to stop me. This is not where it's going to end. When I found out about the CPSW training, and when I applied, they were like, okay, well, how long have you been sober? And at that time, it was 2 years. And they're like, okay, well, you're going to have to wait at least, it has to be 3 or more years for you to be in the training. So I waited. A year went by, and I got back in contact with them, and I took the training, and it wasn't easy at first. And so it took me like a second try. But this time I was all for it. I'm like, you know what, I have to do this. And at that time I was being supported by my family, by my counselor, and finally here I am with this certificate.
As a peer support worker, we are sharing our lived experience with people, just like how you're doing today, but in the capacity where you're face to face with somebody who's struggling. Do you feel like there's a certain responsibility there, or how do you feel about this role?
As I was going through this training, I kind of stepped back for a second, and I was looking at my life, and I was just really amazed to know that I had gotten sober. I had gotten custody of my daughter. I had gotten out of, a domestic violence situation, and I helped change the life of my spouse. And not only that, but to finally be in a stable home to where none of us have to feel like, where are we going to go now? What are we going to do? Just to have that feeling, I felt at that moment that I have broken, that generation cycle, because now I'm teaching my daughter the mistakes that I've gone through. And not only that, but to make them understand that, you don't have to have family. I always tell them to stay strong, to be independent. They're starting to see that now. And so I have come across having the opportunity to speak to a group at this treatment center that I'm with. And so I was really honored that they chose me to speak to this group. And so I totally understand where I was on that other side, listening to somebody else telling their story too. But this time, it was me that was talking to them. So I could relate to how they were feeling. I didn't want them to think this is just somebody else who came out from the success. I also wanted them to feel comfortable knowing that I was in that position too. It really changed a lot for me to have that passion to help people, especially for Native Americans, because we're always being judged for being alcoholics and, drug addicts. And so I know that I can make that change. So my responsibility is to continue on with this new generation that I'm doing for my children. Even though it took a lot to get here, I'm actually proud of myself. I've never been proud of myself. I never told myself that, but I can say that today.
Historically, Native women have always been leaders within their own communities and their own families. And they're healers, they're caretakers. They are thinking not just about the family, but also the community as a whole. Yet violence and trauma and addiction can cause Native women to feel silenced and not have strength in their own voice. You've been able to reclaim your voice. As you just said, you feel so proud of who you are today. But for the women out there who feel silenced, what would you share with them? And why do you think it's important that Native women find their strength?
I never knew who my mother was. And I did learn later on from my older siblings that she had struggled with alcohol and she had gone through domestic violence. And they would ask me, I wonder why she never got away from it. I think that people misunderstand who Native American women are. By that, I mean that they're survivors. They are definitely fighters. I have come across, a lot of women that are either trying to find answers for their loved ones, or they're still hanging on to, these relationships that are like putting them into these difficult situations. And we don't get enough credit for that. People don't understand, just the amount of trauma that we have all gone through. And for them to feel like, I can't say this, it's going to embarrass my family, or I'm going to feel judged from other people. I think that's the reason that a lot of times they don't want to speak on that, is because they don't want to feel ashamed. But from what I've realized is that the only way to heal from that and to become stronger is to just talk about it. When I first told my story to my counselor, he was just like, I can't believe what you've gone through. And I know that there are a lot of women out there who do have family support. I know a lot of times that you do hear that they struggle with like getting along with someone. But for that, I feel that it's, God is like removing these negative people from your life. And even if you have to do it on your own, you can. And it's not the end of the world. Things are going to change. I see so many women that are Native Americans who've gotten their bachelor's or their master's, or that they own their own business. And I'm just so amazed, like, wow, I didn't know that, this is what's going on in the community. And to go to some of these events too, how they're trying to help other women to come together and let them know that there is support out there. There is, groups or other women that try to contact one another to become friends, and that's very powerful. And so that is where I started to see that there's still hope within these women that are struggling with trauma or alcohol or with drugs. And I know that they're going to find their way. And it always takes just that one voice to tell them that they can do it.
I know, because that's how we connected, is through the power of social media. There is a movement happening where Native people are finding their power and finding strength, finding their culture, even if it's on social media, finding pride. And I can say that growing up on the reservation, I wasn't always accepted because I didn't look, exactly like all the other kids at my school. So a part of me sometimes felt like I just couldn't find that pride in who I was, even though my mom would tell me, my grandmother would tell me. But now I realize that pride is what you make of it, And I'm just happy that so many other Natives are finding that in each other and finding a community of support, and especially women, Native women. So I'm so happy that we connected. I wanted to ask one last question. You have showed us the person that you are today, and I just want to know, what legacy would you hope to leave for your children and for future generations of other Natives?
I had a conversation with my oldest about that. And it was probably the first time that she had told me that she is so happy that she's with me and that she doesn't have to feel afraid anymore. And I thought about that. And I was just like, wow, that really did something to me. And not only that, but my stepdaughter, now that she doesn't have a mother, but she has somebody here who's strong and who's helping her also get through life. And they know and they see how strong I am. We talked about that movie, Freaky Friday. Like, if we switch lives or switch bodies, how would you feel? And she told me, I would not want to be you. And she's like, not in a mean way, but it's just that everything that you have to deal with every day. And she's like, I don't know how you do it, but you are here for this family. And all of the trauma that I've put my children through, they've seen how the outcome is now. And even though the other parent is not doing what they promised, that's one thing I try not to do with my children, is to promise. Like, I promise I'm going to do this. I promise I rather show them than tell them, because I feel like your actions speak louder than words. And I have come across a lot of enemies, people that just don't know how to be around me or don't know how to be in my presence. I don't know why that is, but I know that it's the intimidation part of it. But I also learned too that no matter how much people had tried to bring me down, like, they have really tried everything. And I think now they understand that, hey, we can't mess with her now. We gave it all. We tried everything, and she's not falling down. She is not giving up. And that is something that I want for for my legacy is that she never gave up. She's a survivor. She is definitely a warrior for sure.
Salencia, thank you so much for trusting us with your story. It's not easy to come here and to be so vulnerable, but I hope that other people can listen and also find strength in themselves because of what you've told us today and shared your journey with us. I do want to turn to our audience and say that for any Native relatives who are out there listening to this today, that we all have some teaching, some wisdom, something that we've learned along the way through our own struggles. And I hope that we can share that with each other, even in this space. So if you would kindly share comments down below, I read the comments, the audience read the comments, and hopefully your comment can help somebody else through their own journey. If this conversation means something important to you, please share with somebody else. Thank you all again for being here on this episode with Project Basecamp, and we'll see you on the next one. Please help me in this journey to help change the trajectory of our story. We are Project Basecamp, and we are climbing to recovery.